Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Watch Party.
All right, I want to thank everybody so much for coming to this community meeting where we're going to discuss the Amazon tax and the way that we can most fight for the maximum funding for social housing, to fight gentrification, to house working people, and so that ordinary people have places to live in the city, and to make big business pay for it. We're going to hear comparisons of the different Amazon taxes being discussed, one from the movement, one from the Democratic establishment. But first, we're going to hear from Councilmember Shama Sawant to provide some context and some instruction for how we can most effectively fight for the biggest possible big business tax so that working people have housing, fight gentrification and racism. So take it, Councilmember Sawant.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I think it's incredibly powerful testimonial to the fact that building movements works, that this morning, the City Council, many of whom actually were responsible for repealing our movement's Amazon tax in 2018, are now pledging to pass an Amazon tax this year. This is entirely and exclusively because of the tremendous grassroots campaign that thousands of us, just ordinary people, labor union rank and file, progressive activists from various communities, including South Asian and Latinx immigrant activists, and Black and Brown community members and leaders, faith leaders from multiple faiths, all of us together and with socialists, united around this struggle, because we all believe that this is that we have a city and a state with the nation's most regressive tax system, and especially as our economy nosedives into a recession that in many ways is going to be worse than the Great Depression, that the billionaire class, the multimillionaires and the millionaires continue to enjoy a criminal tax haven, while working people, especially disproportionately communities of color, suffer even more than we were already facing the crisis of housing affordability. And so I just wanted to make sure we don't, there's no way to overemphasize this. I mean, this is precisely because of the strategy that we have used of energizing and emboldening and empowering our rank and file ordinary people in our city and in our region. And it is our movement that is forcing the Democrats on the City Council to even begin to take action. And so today, as Adam referenced, today the City Council, today and hopefully Wednesday of next week, the City Council will be considering our movement's Amazon tax versus the Democrats' Amazon tax proposal that they have brought forward. And our job is crucial here because, one, if we stop building the movement today, then I can almost guarantee you no tax on big business will be passed, because it is only because of the pressure of our movement and a fear that we might end up passing a bigger tax that big business is being forced to concede. They're being forced to recognize the tremendous community support for the Amazon tax. And so the crucial component, the backbone on which any possible victory will rest, is whether or not we build our movement and continue doing what we are doing, and in fact, build it even stronger. So to that end, I really wanted to urge everybody who's watching this, and make sure you tell your friends, families, community members. You should join us for the People's Budget Town Hall tomorrow. That's Thursday, June 25th at 6 p.m. Because of stay-at-home restrictions and because of the difficulties people are facing commuting and so on, we're going to be doing it online. We had originally we had originally considered to do it at Cal Anderson Park, but I think we want to make sure that everybody is able to attend without any restrictions of commuting. So we want to make sure that we have maximum attendance. So we will be doing it online. So make sure to connect to our live stream tomorrow, Thursday, June 25th at 6 p.m. And for those of you who might be familiar, but those of you who might not, we have to remember we have won tremendous victories through the People's Budget campaigning. And it's precisely because we have brought the voice of ordinary people, working people, marginalized communities, communities of color to the front lines, and rejected a business as usual budget every single year. And it is because of the People's Budget movement that last year we won a remarkable victory, which was winning over $500,000 for restorative justice programs run by community activists themselves. It was just an incredible victory we won, and it was along the lines of defund. So, if we could win $500,000 and plus last year, imagine what we could win in the midst of this uprising against racism and police violence. So clearly tomorrow at our town hall, a big part of how we get organized will be about the defunding the police by at least 50%. That's crucial that we keep pushing for. The mayor has released a budget. We are going to be talking about the budget tomorrow, not today, but because today we need to focus on the Amazon tax question. But we can guarantee you that Amazon's Mayor Durkin, the corporate mayor Jenny Durkin, who until a few days ago was allowing the police to tear gas our movement, is going to deliver a budget full of cuts to social services and to the necessary funds that our community needs. And it will not be defunding the police by 50%. We can guarantee that. So there is no option but for us to get organized and win. And in addition to that, we want to win renters' rights funding in the budget, and we want to win the strongest possible Amazon tax. So today, what's the discussion? The discussion is, should the city council vote on our movement's Amazon tax or what they have come up with, which is Democrats' Amazon tax? So having said that any Amazon tax passing is entirely due to our movement, we are also continuing to fight for the strongest possible tax. And unfortunately, the Democrats' Amazon tax legislation currently falls well short of what the community immediately needs. And I would urge Nick Jones from my office to share the link to our talking points document if that has not been done already, because we want to make sure that our public comment this morning is really effective. It has been really effective so far. So congratulations to everybody who has spoken so powerfully in our public comment on committee after committee after committee. I really just wanted to say how grateful we are together in our office for the dedication that people have shown in coming to public comment and preparing their points, and being so assiduous about putting forward the interests of our movement. So our tax, which is the Sawant Morales Amazon tax legislation, which is our movement's legislation, will bring in $500 million a year by taxing big business. It would begin immediately, and it would fund COVID relief, social housing, and Green New Deal. The Democrats' Amazon tax proposal, on the other hand, would raise $174 million a year, which is less than half of what our movement is proposing through the Sawant Morales tax. I mean, it's just stunning. And it will be delayed until 2022. Our tax, according to staff who will go over these the details in the committee itself, which I hope you'll watch, they will show you that our, comparing apples to apples, making an equivalent comparison with our tax of $500 million, in 10 years, we could build 10,600 new affordable homes. How many will the Democrats' Amazon tax proposal build? 3,200 affordable homes in 10 years. That's a world of a difference. So these are not political talking points. These are actually which tax passes will actually have a material impact on the lives of the most marginalized, the ones who are most struggling under skyrocketing rents. So this is not a cosmetic difference for us. We are fighting for the right to affordable housing for our people in our city. This is a huge thing because that's a fundamental human right. It should be a fundamental human right, and yet we have a dramatic crisis in affordable housing. So the question to ask in public comment is why, when we have an entire movement willing to fight for a $500 million tax, when we have the clergy, when we have progressive rank and file labor union members, Democratic Party members who have passed resolutions in their legislative districts, when socialists, all of us are fighting and are willing to stand with the city council in passing the strongest possible tax. Why is it that these politicians are not standing with us and instead putting forward a proposal that doesn't even come close to addressing immediately our needs? On top of the difference in how much it will raise, the Democrats are proposing in their Amazon tax that it should have a sunset clause, meaning the tax would expire in 2030. Why? Do we think the need for affordable housing will be over by then? Of course not. It's because that's all that big business will accept, because they want their corporate tax haven back. So this also shows, the difference in the strategy. When you use a movement building strategy and when you have an elected representative who is willing, whose office has the courage to stand with working people and defy the pressure from big business, then you can push for and win a very strong Amazon tax. But when you restrict yourself to having private conversations with big business, then it gets so severely watered down, and then on top of that they will demand a sunset clause. Let me say this, the only thing that needs a sunset clause in our city is the regressive tax system that we have had. What needs a sunset clause is the deep inequality and poverty that we are facing in our city, despite record wealth being created and the burden of the recession being put on our shoulders. What we need a sunset clause is the underfunding of our education, housing, homeless services, and other social services. So we have to be very clear about what we are demanding. And one of the most important components of what, in the social context that we are in, given the uprising on racism and police violence, is that whether or not the Democrats support our strongest possible Amazon tax has everything to do with them saying Black Lives Matter. If they say Black Lives Matter, then why aren't they fighting for the strongest possible tax? Last week, I was able to do an incredible, just wonderful press conference with Black faith leaders. And we had it in the Central District at Reverend Jeffrey's church, at the New Hope Missionary Baptist Church. And there, the leaders of the clergy demanded that the city council should raise at least $500 million per year, because they want at least 1,000 affordable homes just in the Central District to bring back the working class Black community that has been so brutally uprooted, first by decades of openly racist redlining policies, and then over the last decade by economic redlining and the racist gentrification that has happened through skyrocketing rents. So there are deep wrongs that have to be corrected, and it's not enough that politicians say they need to be corrected. I mean, I hear them ad nauseum saying they need to be corrected. I hear them saying Black Lives Matter, but it's a question of putting dollars, putting action to the rhetoric. We don't want rhetoric, we want action. So what we want is at least 1,000 affordable homes just in the Central District. Plus, we want to fund thousands more affordable homes citywide, and we want to fund tens of thousands of good jobs, especially as 100,000 Seattleites are reporting that they have become jobless or have lost hours. So our demand is the city council should do more than what's acceptable to big business, and acknowledge that the for-profit housing market has been one of the most violent and destructive weapons directed at working class and poor Black and brown communities. That is the reality. And to quote Reverend Kerry Anderson, who's pastor of the Seattle First American Methodist Episcopal Church, said, simply put, if Black Lives Matter, then affordable housing for Black families in the Central District should matter. We are simply asking if we really believe in the rhetoric or not, in the slogans. If Black Lives Matter, then do what's right. That's their message to the city council. And so we should relay that message and stand in solidarity with our Black and brown neighbors and with our multiracial movement against racism, and demand that the city council do the right thing. And one other thing I wanted to add before others take over is that at the very least, I mean, this is a very low bar we're setting. The Democratic Party politicians need to stop engaging in misinformation about the Savant Morales Amazon tax, about our movement's tax. We are hearing from many of the Democratic Party city council members saying or implying that our Savant Morales Amazon tax is regressive or less progressive than the Democrats' Amazon tax. This is just stunning misinformation. Let's be very clear, and I'm speaking as an economist right now. Both taxes are an Amazon tax. I don't care what terms they use. Both are Amazon taxes because they only tax big business, not workers or small businesses. So who will pay this tax? It will be the owners and the major shareholders, the big executives. They will be of those companies. They will be paying the tax, not the employees of those companies. So demand that the city council Democrats at least be honest and not mislead their constituents with this willful distortion. And if you want to talk about progressivity, I'll tell you about progressivity. In fact, the Savant Morales Amazon tax is effectively far more progressive because it raises twice the revenues and it does not have the corporate loopholes like the sunset clause. So, case closed. And we have to make it very clear, the exclusion of taxes on salaries under 150K is in fact not progressive. I mean, this is the claim that the Democrats are making, or at least they're implying. You'll see different versions of this. They are implying that because their tax only taxes payroll for salaries over $150,000, that theirs is more progressive. That is absolute garbage. I mean, that is not true. They are engaging in willful misinformation. And in fact, that is a right-wing talking point, because the right wing and big business and the Chamber of Commerce, they call this tax a tax on jobs because they want people to believe falsely that this is a tax on the workers on their salaries and not on the corporations. That is completely untrue. That is a mythology that has been debunked by economists throughout the world. So we have to reject that, and we have to call out the Democrats who are using the right-wing talking points to try and discredit our proposal as less progressive. Both proposals are enormously progressive. Both proposals are an Amazon tax. Both of them represent the tremendous momentum of the movement, and both of them would be a huge step forward for our society. However, our tax is actually effectively more progressive because we would raise twice the amount and we don't have a sunset clause. And we have to demand that Democratic Party council members just stop using these right-wing talking points. Just please stop doing that, because that can only damage our collective ability to win a strong big business tax. So if you support the big business tax, then stop using right-wing talking points. Let's make sure we make it clear that both taxes are progressive. But I'll just end by saying, we have come this far only on the back of our movement, of our collective organizing, of building unity on the ground across races, across job descriptions, all the way from Amazon security workers and Amazon cargo handlers and drivers to Amazon tech workers, librarians, educators, Democratic Party members, socialists, Black and brown community members, everybody in our community. We have joined together, and we may have other differences, but we are absolutely united on passing the strongest possible Amazon tax. So let's fight today, and then join us tomorrow, Thursday, June 25th at 6 p.m. for our online People's Budget Town Hall.
All right. Thank you so much, Shama, for providing that political context and going into with some detail into the legislation. Later on, we're going to have Jonathan, a community organizer in our office who's worked on the legislation, go through those slides so that people can see kind of right next to each other just how different these pieces of legislation are. And but before that, recognizing that many have already signed up for public comment, but also that there are likely some new people we want to have Nick Jones in our office, or I'm sorry, Ted Verdone in our office, just run through real quickly in just a few minutes how to sign up for public comment on the Seattle channel. It really does have a huge impact when council members see, dozens, if not hundreds of people signing up, at 8 a.m., at 9 a.m. to give public comment and going to great lengths to do that. It really does put pressure on them, and especially when it's got the political clarity that we're able to develop through these community meetings with people and the questions they're asking, et cetera. So Ted, why don't you go ahead and take it from here and tell people how to sign up.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Adam. So I'm going to go into my web browser. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I think many people have done it before. And I'm going to just type into Google or wherever. I'm going to type in Seattle Public Comment. And the first thing that pops up should be the public comment sign-up sheet, which it is. So I click on that. And then I get to this page where I can sign up for public comment. Because these are remote meetings, you still have to sign up online. And then you get an email, and the email gives you a phone number to call to give public comment. So I put in my information. Put in my name, I put in my email address. I spell it correctly. It's important that I use the correct email address because, as I said, you're going to get an email at this email address that gives you the call-in information. Then I give my phone number. This has to be whatever phone number I'm actually going to call in from because that's how the IT people know which phone to unmute. I put in my phone number, zip code. That's new. All right, I'm going to put in my zip code. And I select what I'm going to speak to. I select the meeting, which is only one option, and then I'm going to describe what I'm going to speak to. So I could say tax Amazon or defund the police. But in this case, I'm going to say this is only a test. Don't call on me. But you would put in a real reason. I put submit. And it looks like a blank screen, but actually if I scrolled back up on the screen, I'd see that it was done. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my email. And I should have a new email with all the information about, yeah, here it is, council public comment. As you can see, it's working really well. There we go. So it's got the information that I put in, and when I scroll to the bottom, that has all the information, the phone number I call, the password that I put in, everything like that. So I call that number a little bit before the meeting starts at 10 a.m. I put in the ID, I put in the password, whatever it asked me to put in, and then I'm basically going to wait on hold until I'm unmuted and it's my turn to speak. And that's how you sign up for public comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So yeah, now that we're done with the that kind of technical stuff, let's go on to hear more about the specifics of the two tax Amazon pieces of legislation. One, from the movement that has been built out of hundreds of people in action on the streets and in organizing meetings and developing democratically legislation that would address the needs of the community, both in social housing, Green New Deal, and COVID-19 relief, alongside the Democratic establishment's proposal. And of course, given there are a lot of details in this, we thought it good to, in addition to Shama's really excellent political contextualization, just lay out flat, side by side these details. And we've got Jonathan Rosenblum in our office to provide that context. People should, of course, also write questions that they have in the chat function of the live stream you're watching. And so, yeah, Jonathan, without further ado, if you could take it from here and help us better understand how we can, these two pieces of legislation, and with the express purpose, of course, of pressuring council to pass the strongest possible piece of legislation.
Great. Thank you, Adam. And is my microphone on? Ted, could you just confirm that I can be heard? Great.
Great.
So I'm going to go through a slideshow of about half a dozen slides here to compare the two tax Amazon proposals that are before City Council. And the last slide will have a URL where you can access this slideshow online yourselves for this morning and beyond, just to have as a continuing reference. Let's go to the next slide. So as Shama said, we really need to give credit where it's due. We would only be here looking at two different Amazon tax proposals because of the movement's strength over the last really 2.5 years in demanding an Amazon tax beginning in late 2017, bringing the movement forward in 2018, winning a modest tax, having a setback when it was repealed shamefully by the establishment, and then coming back to the place where we are today. The fact that the City Council is now moving forward together on an Amazon tax is exclusively due to the thousands of people who over the last 2.5 years have been fighting for the tax Amazon movement. And as Shama said, a very diverse coalition, community members and activists, communities of color, union members, socialists, some progressive Democrats in legislative districts who've been fighting the establishment too for a $500 million Amazon tax. And we've arrived at the point where big business has been forced to recognize the tremendous community support for the Amazon tax. Now, what you're going to hear today in some of the presentations from central staff is they'll call it the Jumpstart proposal, which is really just the propaganda term that the establishment and big business have sort of landed on to try to call their Amazon tax proposal something other than what it really is, which is an Amazon tax. And so don't be misled by this attempt to sort of propagandize what they've conceded to. They are proposing an Amazon tax as well. Let's go to the next slide. First of all, just in terms of what is similar, the basic contours of the two bills, the basic structure rather, has some similarity. Our movement's proposal, brought forward by Council Member Suwanta Morales, taxes Amazon and other big businesses. So does the Democratic Party establishment's Amazon tax. It taxes Amazon and other big businesses. Both tax proposals are based on a payroll tax on companies with payrolls over $7 million a year. It's the same concept. Next slide. Differences, and there are big differences. Our legislation, our movement's legislation taxes these companies at a rate of 1.3% of the corporate payroll. And that is what brings in the money. There are no loopholes. In other words, we don't create an exemption for employers that have low-wage workers that mistreat workers by paying them low wages. We say all of your payroll, if you're over $7 million a year in payroll expenses, you pay 1.3% of your corporate payroll in a tax. The Democratic Party establishment's Amazon tax has a sliding scale, and it's a little complicated, but most corporations that have to pay the tax would pay at a rate of 0.7%, so about half the rate of the movement's tax proposal. And interestingly enough, too, the establishment's Amazon tax would tax only the compensation of employees that are making above $150,000 a year. So basically, the establishment's Amazon tax legislation creates a loophole for lower wage employers that pay workers below that number, and especially employers that pay workers poverty wages, they're going to skate pretty free on the establishment's Amazon tax proposal. Let's go to the next slide. The other differences, and these are very noteworthy, as Shama's already mentioned, our proposal, our Amazon tax proposal brings in $500 million a year. The establishment's Amazon tax proposal brings in $173.5 million a year. Our tax would begin immediately. In other words, beginning next month, corporations would begin to accrue a tax bill. They wouldn't have to pay it till a year and a half from now, but they would begin to accrue that liability now, whereas the establishment's Amazon tax requires companies to start paying next year. Our tax is permanent tax, and it makes our tax structure in the city more fair by making corporations finally begin to pay something in taxes. Their tax is temporary. It expires in 2030. Other differences. Our proposal in terms of how we spend the money is that we would spend $200 million this year in urgently needed COVID relief for working class households throughout the city, especially low-income households, communities of color, and so on. Their proposal would fund less than half of that money, that amount, in COVID relief, $86 million. In 2021, our tax would spend $500 million a year, begin to spend $500 million a year in social housing, Green New Deal investments, excuse the typo there, and job creation. Their proposal would spend next year $86 million, most of which would be used to backfill cuts in the city's budget because of the mayor's austerity budget. And some of that $86 million would be for continued COVID relief, but there would be no investment in housing or jobs, and certainly no investment in Green New Deal until the following year at best. In 2022, and again, these numbers are slightly higher than the baseline numbers for the revenue because the city's assuming inflation, but we would spend about $400 million a year for housing and $133 million a year for Green New Deal projects, beginning in 2022. The establishment's Amazon tax would spend about $143 million for housing, a little bit more than 1/3 of what the movement's Amazon tax legislation would do. And it would spend the rest of it on equitable development initiative funds, which are not a bad idea. But spend a small amount on that and small business support. And again, their legislation would expire in 2030, as if magically the housing crisis and human needs go away in 2030. Next slide. Comparing some of the results that the City Council's central staff have developed, data on the number of housing units that would be built and the number of jobs. Our proposal in the first 10 years, our movement's Amazon tax proposal would build 10,600 new affordable homes, serving households from no income all the way up to 100% area median income, which is right now in the mid $80,000 range. So it would serve working class households, those who have no income, to all the way including working class households that are struggling at $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 annual income. The establishment's Amazon tax would build 3,200 new affordable homes, less than 1/3 the number of homes that our proposal would build. And also noteworthy is that their proposal would only serve households up to 50% area median income. It would not provide any housing for households in the $50,000 to $80,000 a year annual income range. Our proposal would, according to central staff, either create or support 34,000 jobs in the first 10 years. the establishment's Amazon tax would create or support a lot fewer jobs, and it's probably in the single thousands number, but central staff does not have a figure. They've simply told us that it is going to be a much lower number than the movement's Amazon tax proposal. In terms of democratic oversight of how the money gets spent, we have proposed a social housing board of 23 renters, initially appointed, but beginning in 2023, democratically elected by voters in each council district. And we would also bring the Green New Deal Oversight Board, which is newly established, into oversight of the Green New Deal investments under our Amazon tax proposal. The establishment's Amazon tax would create a payroll tax oversight committee of 9 members appointed just by the mayor and the council with no democratic election at any point. Let's go down to the next slide. I would just conclude by saying that if you want to review this slide in more detail, it is available online at tinyurl.com/tax-amazon-comparison. And I will stop here and see if there are any questions. Please put your questions in the chat, and we will review them and try to answer them. I see one question here from Elena. Why have you decided to tax those workers who are making less than 150,000? Does this not hurt low wage and working class people, or is this a misunderstanding? And let me just explain that this is a tax on corporate payroll. It is not a tax on working people. In fact, both pieces of the legislation, both the movements and also the establishment's Amazon tax legislation, make it very clear that this is a tax on business. It is not a tax on the worker's paycheck. And we are, in our proposal, the reason why our proposal is more progressive is we are saying that if a business is paying more than $7 million in payroll, they need to pay the tax, and they cannot create an exemption for themselves from the tax by paying workers less money. That under the establishment's Amazon tax proposal, there is actually an incentive for businesses to keep workers under that pay threshold of 150,000 so that they can escape their tax liability. And we don't think that that is a corporate loophole that big business needs, and it certainly is going to cut into the revenue that can be generated from a tax on corporate payroll.
Hey, Jonathan, I see there's another question here that asks, how can we incorporate our agenda, the tax Amazon, within the Black Lives Matter movement? Do those relate? And I know that there's been, discussion about the demand, but maybe articulate that, an answer to that question.
Yeah, and Shama mentioned this really amazing press conference that she joined with the clergy from the central area last week, where the African-American clergy described how over the decades, Black families have been pushed out of the central area, the central district, by developers, by banks, and also by city policy. And they actually presented some documentation that showed how in the 1960s, the city forced New Hope Missionary Baptist Church to sell part of their land to the city, really for a pittance for I think $34,000. And that land is worth $2 million today. And the church wants it back to be able to build 90 affordable homes to bring back African-American families into the community. And this is just one example of how land has literally been stolen from African-American households and institutions over the decades from in the central district. And the clergy described how the demand for housing and the demand to tax big business at a rate of $500 million a year, which they entirely support, is not just about building housing. It's also about reparations to the African-American community that has suffered under this racist gentrification policy of the city for decades. The clergy in particular said we need to build at least 1,000 new affordable homes in the Central District with this Amazon tax money to bring back African-American families to the Central District and to de-gentrify the CD. And so they see that this movement for Black Lives Matter and this movement to de-gentrify the Central District depends on us winning this Amazon tax at a level that is going to allow us to build the kind of homes that they are calling for. And as Shama quoted from the pastor Pastor Kerry Anderson of Seattle's First AME Church, he said, simply put, if Black Lives matter, then affordable housing for Black families in the central area should matter as well. And so we really want to lift up that voice as we fight for this Amazon tax, for the $500 million, because we recognize that when we win this $500 million tax on Amazon and other big businesses, we will have the ability to build these 1,000 units in the central area, to build thousands of new affordable homes, actually in working class neighborhoods throughout the city, to bring working people back.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. And we're going to talk briefly in a minute here about the people's budget, which, you know, the same question comes up about how the struggle for a budget that doesn't, you know, cut programs for communities and also communities of color, but instead actually goes to big business and funds those and goes to the police department, you know, takes from the police and puts in community. We'll be talking about that in a minute. There's another really good question from Peggy Holtz, who asks, which council members have not committed to one of these options? But before I'll pass it to Jonathan, it's just worth noting, you know, as has been mentioned several times now, we only got to this position where the Democratic establishment feels compelled to put together something that does tax big business, you know, not nearly to the extent that the movement's Amazon tax does, but that does tax big business. We're only at this point because of the movement that's been built. Let's not forget that less than, you know, a year ago, Amazon was trying to buy the city council, and we can rest assured that had they succeeded, had it not been for the thousands of people who, you know, who donated their time, their money, their energy to ensure that the movement had a voice inside City Hall. And then without the activism, you know, the 500 plus people at the Tax Amazon launch, the hundreds more who have participated throughout the last 6 months. Without that, we wouldn't be in this situation where there were even an option for, you know, council members, you know, to pressure to get the most out of it. But to that an immediate question right here, right now, as the budget, committee discusses, Jonathan, maybe you can clarify for us which council members have taken a position and where so far.
Well, a lot of council members have weighed in, and the establishment's proposal is officially being sponsored by 5 council members: Mosqueda, Strauss, Lewis, Gonzalez, and Herbold. The movement's legislation is sponsored by Sawant and Morales, and we have not heard from council members Juarez and Peterson. But I really think it's important that activists understand that just because the establishment politicians have endorsed a particular proposal right now doesn't mean that they can't be moved to change that. In fact, we're going to hear some of that stuff today and even last week when the establishment's proposal was first being introduced. Some of the establishment politicians who have now come around to officially endorse the legislation raised their own questions and began to propose amendments. The question of whether we can get them to change some fundamentals about their legislation, such as the amount of money it would raise or closing corporate loopholes or ending the sunset depends on the strength of our movement in the next few weeks. So just because a particular elected official has endorsed a particular piece of legislation does not mean that they cannot be moved and persuaded, but it's going to take, just as it has for the last 2.5 years, the activism and engagement of our movement to push them to do better than what's currently being proposed by the establishment in the establishment's Amazon tax.
Great. And we've got some really good questions coming in. I'll ask this one from Angelica. I earn 80% of area median income. I'm really struggling to continue living in the city. There's literally no affordable housing for my income level. How much affordable housing would this create for those of us between 60 to 80% of area median income?
That's a great question, Angelique. And I know a lot of people are in the same situation that you are in. And I think that it's very important, especially if you're speaking in public comment today, to point out that the establishment's Amazon tax does absolutely nothing to help provide affordable housing for people in your circumstances. And that's why they need to adopt the approach that the movement has taken in the Sawant and Morales bill that funds affordable housing between 0 and 100% of area median income. I can't tell you exactly how many different units of housing are built at each segment of area median income, but I do know that the legislation that our movement has put forward says we need to build at the lowest end, and we need to also build at the middle parts of the area median income as well. And with our legislation building 10,600 homes in the next 10 years, we know that a lot of them are going to be serving people in your range. And we also know the establishment's proposal in its current form funds no homes in the 60 to 80% area median income range.
All right, and we've got Joyce Glasgow. Thank you, Jonathan. Ask, is there any opportunity to lower or end the very high regressive Seattle sales tax, which unfairly tax burdens all residents, including low-income, unemployed, and middle-income persons? Jonathan, can you speak to how this Amazon tax relates either directly or indirectly to that sales
Well,
tax?
right now we live in the state with the most regressive tax burden on working people in the entire nation, more regressive than Mississippi and Alabama and other states that have regressive taxation. Working people pay on average 6 times the amount of their income and taxes compared to the wealthiest Washington residents. And a big reason for this is things like the sales tax, which falls disproportionately, the burden of the sales tax falls disproportionately on working people like ourselves. The Amazon tax is a first step toward correcting this egregious imbalance by saying we're going to end this corporate tax haven that big corporations have enjoyed in Seattle by requiring them to pay, frankly, a modest tax on their corporate payroll. But then we can't stop there. Once we win this, we're going to have to go on and fight for taxes on the wealthy. And some of this stuff has to be litigated through courts, like income tax. Some of these issues can be advanced, like capital gains taxes and so on. Our movement needs to be working at the city level after we win the Amazon tax on these other opportunities at the city level to tax big business and the billionaire class. And we also have to work with our friends and allies at the state level in building a movement to demand a statewide capital gains tax and a statewide income tax on multimillionaires and billionaires. And next week, in fact, Councilmember Sawant is attending a town hall with state employees, members of the Washington Federation of State Employees, who are very eager to fight for this Amazon tax at the city level, and also are going to be working with us and our movement in fighting for progressive taxation at the state level.
All right,
As we achieve these gains, we can also look then at how we lower taxes that fall disproportionately on working people. And I just want to note a couple. One is the sales tax that Joyce mentioned. The other is the property taxes that fall disproportionately on working people too, and especially seniors with fixed incomes are extremely burdened and are getting economically evicted because of these rising property taxes. And then business taxes fall disproportionately on small struggling businesses, and we need to look at that as well.
All right, thank you so much. And we're just 5 minutes out, so I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about the people's budget. And there's actually been some questions which have related to that exactly. But I really want to thank people for joining us this morning. The opportunity to pressure City Council to pass the biggest possible business tax. We know that that whether they pass, the movement's Amazon tax, or whether they pass the Amazon tax that the Democratic establishment is putting forward, the only reason why any of this is possible is because of our movement. It's also, of course, why they want to give it some new name like Jumpstart. They want to blur the lines between who actually passes these things and how we win change that benefits working people. And of course, that cuts to the question of, sales tax, property taxes. We know that when it's not a movement that advances it directly, then it will be ordinary people who disproportionately pay far more than their fair share of the cost. To that end, several people have asked questions. Heather Wilson asked, creating affordable housing is necessary, but what about preventing evictions now? Does this proposal do anything for this? Now, obviously, we feel that building social housing is the best eviction prevention program you can have. But of course, that's not going to save the literally thousands and thousands of people who are at risk of eviction, especially right now during this pandemic, as so many people have lost jobs, so many people have lost significant hours in pay. And the landlords, there's eviction moratoria, there's reprieves of several months, but landlords we know are chomping at the bit to recover their lost costs and it's going to be on the backs of renters unless we organize a fight and unless we make it so we cancel the rent, so that we suspend rent, eviction or utility and mortgage payments, so that it's not renters, working class renters who've been laid off, or struggling homeowners or struggling small businesses, but rather the corporate landlords, the big banks who have to pay the cost. And tomorrow at the People's Budget, we're going to be having people to speak to that struggle that's building of renters fighting back so that we don't have to pay the costs. And of course, during the budget, for a few years now, we've presented amendments that would fund attorneys so that every renter facing eviction can have free access to legal, to an attorney, to legal representation. Last year, shamefully, the City Council, instead of spending the $600,000 that would be required to provide legal assistance for everybody, they whittled it down to just one. Obviously, we want a much stronger People's Budget movement this year to win much more for renters. And then, of course, and I'll just end with the main demands around the Justice for George Floyd movement, the demand that has emerged organically from the movement to defund the SPD, to take $200 million of the $409 million Seattle Police Department budget and transfer that directly into community, to fund community centers, jobs programs, things that will benefit especially communities of color who have been crushed for so long by the rising inequality, the gentrification. We're going to discuss ways that we can, take this inspiring but extremely complex Capitol Hill or occupied protest zone and fund the East Precinct to be transferred into a community center, into affordable housing. These things are possible, but of course, only if we've got a movement that's built around them. So it's 9:59 right now. That's just an indication of some of the demands that we're going to be making in the People's Budget movement to say no to the austerity budget that Mayor Durkan put forward yesterday, where she's literally asking departments in a city where basic needs are being neglected, and we have $1 trillion company that's not paying anywhere near their fair share, together with whole hosts of big business. The mayor is literally asking departments to cut between 5 to 10%. She's promoting that as though the Seattle Police Department is cutting. We want the Seattle Police Department cut by half, and we want that money to go to community needs. And we want also taxes on big business so that the departments that fund communities and carry out basic community needs are funded but not cut. So please join us tomorrow, 6 p.m. online. We'd initially advertised, as Shama mentioned, at Cal Anderson. We're not able to make that happen for logistical reasons, but please join us online. There should be a link in the chat. And it's 10 a.m. right now, so hopefully dozens of you who are, are watching right now have signed up for public comment, and right now should go to the Seattle channel and where the council meeting to discuss these 2 Amazon taxes will begin. So thank you so much for joining our community meeting on behalf of Councilmember Shama Sawan, and let's go out there and fight for the strongest possible Amazon tax for a people's budget for a city that